exciting stuff and say this, right? Or but if you want to know about it, ask him. It's more recent, but maybe it'll be mentioned in his talk, but I don't know. Yeah. So we saw what SVD is. Just to recap, it was a best fit subspace to the data, right? Best fit in the sense of minimizing sum of squared perpendicular distance. So we'll see actually two applications, but for similar things, because I don't want to define several areas. One is this result about learning Gaussian mixtures. So suppose you had a mixture of K, which is constant, K is small, we assume, spherical Gaussians in RD, all with standard deviations, one in all directions, and means separated by a constant amount. So maybe I'll draw a little picture. So it's like this. Here we have two Gaussians, means separated by a constant, right? And the variances were one in each direction, but there could be many, right? But each pairwise center is separated by at least a constant. So it really is fits that mnemonic, means separated by a constant number of standard deviations, right? And you would like to learn them. That is, you're given samples from a mixture. I guess all of you know what a mixture is, I should say, perhaps. So mixture is just weighted sum, convex combination of probability densities, right? So P1, P2, etc. are Gaussians, and you have K of them, and it's a convex combination. And I generate samples from this. You could also think of it as if I'm picking one of the P's with probabilities proportional to the weights and generating sample from that P. Or you can think of it as generating each sample from the mixture. And of course, I don't tell you which P it came from. Your job is to learn it. So is to find the Gaussians, right? Well, in this case, I told you the standard deviations are 1, so finding just means the means. More generally, it could be general non-spherical Gaussians, and you are to find the variance covariance matrix as well as the mean. So find the Gaussians. Okay. Wempel and Wang gave a polynomial time algorithm using SVD, which I'd like to describe. So it can be done in polynomial time, this task. Now, what I would like to say is first try distance-based clustering. What does distance-based clustering mean? Just take the example of two. I have samples from both of them. I pick up one of the points and take everybody closest to it. And the hope is everybody in its own cluster will be closest to it, in its own Gaussian, and everybody in the other Gaussian will be farther from everybody in the same Gaussian. Of course, in this picture says that's not true. I mean, don't believe the picture, but it's not true unless the separation is really large. I won't sit and prove that, but it's a simple calculation. So unless you have this larger separation, D is, we are thinking of asymptotic. So D, the delta constant, it's not true that points closest to your own points. So that's no good. It doesn't help. Now, random projection does not help. Random projection does shrink this as well as this, but not well enough at all to, in fact, it gets worse, this inequality with random projections. But here is a thought. If only we could project to the space spanned by the means. So in this picture of 2, if only somebody would tell me this subspace spanned by the origin and this. If somebody did tell me that, we saw that I could project to this. I get two nice Gaussians now in one dimension. Means separated by constant number of standard deviations. We all know how to handle that. So then maybe we can do this. So what happens then? Then delta remains the same, right? Because we are projecting to the space of centers. D, however, has become much smaller, namely K, and therefore this inequality is more likely to be true at a small separation, right? So then you can do distance based in the projection. The projection is very simple. And what Wempel and Wang showed, and once I'll show you this, I'm going to show you this proof in a picture next slide, showed is that, in fact, the k-dimensional subspace is exactly equal to the subspace of means if I had the whole densities. I don't have whole densities, I have only the empirical, I have only samples from the densities, then it'll be approximately. And I'm going to prove this to you because it's a very nice proof. Okay. So the SVD subspace, one-dimensional best fit line is exactly this. There's a confusion between k and k minus 1, but ignore that. So here's the proof that the SVD subspace is a space of means. So take one Gaussian and let the mean of it not be the origin. Okay, let's assume it's not the origin. I want to claim the best fit one-dimensional subspace to a single spherical Gaussian is the line through the center, through its mean, through its center and the origin. Okay, so why is that? So I'm going to give you a hand-wavy proof. It's easy to write down and prove it. So here's a line. That line splits the sphere into two, so these distances are sort of symmetric about this. Now, if I wiggle this line away so it doesn't pass through the center, if it goes like this, for instance, some points will get very close to it, but the points that get very far, you have to pay a lot because it's squaring. Okay, you have to do a calculation. The calculation is pretty simple. Therefore, but very simple to prove that this is true, but that's the intuition. Okay. Now that implies, also simply, if I look at any k-dimensional subspace containing the line, it is a best fit because they're all a best fit k-dimensional subspace for the single Gaussian. That implies 3, very simply, again. Why? So I want to say now the best fit k-dimensional subspace for data drawn from k Gaussians is the subspace containing the centers. Well, this subspace, k-dimensional subspace containing the centers, is individually the best fit for each Gaussian, so of course it must be the best fit for the whole, right? It's a stronger condition than being the best fit for the mixture. It's individually a best fit for each one. So this is for spherical Gaussians. There are extensions to non-spherical, but it's more difficult. So this is really the proof that SVD subspace helps. So here's an example where random projections will not do the job, but if you did SVD, you get it. Now, I want to present another example of the use of SVD to something slightly more complicated, that is k-means clustering, but similar, but without a stochastic model. And I'll say a little more about that. I titled it this way because I'm going to talk in the next slide about some more examples where you can do away with stochastic models of data and still get results. So here, the theorem, the hypothesis is there's an unknown k clustering of data. It's not k Gaussians anymore, k clustering of data with cluster centers so-and-so, so that the following is true, and I'll explain that with a picture in a minute. For each I and j, 2 clusters, a data point in cluster I want to say is closer to its own center than the cluster j's center. So in fact, in this sense, in cluster I, when projected to the line joining the centers of the 2 clusters, is closer to mu I and mu j. And I'm going to measure distances by standard deviation sigma, except I have to tell you what standard deviation means without stochastic assumptions. I'll tell you that at the end. At the moment, just think of it as standard deviation. So what is this statement saying? So here's a cluster point. Here's a data point. And it belongs to cluster I, this cluster I. And cluster I's center is here. There's some other cluster whose center is here. In this picture, it's nice. It's closer to this than that. But what I'm really requiring is that I project it to this line. This is distance A. This is B. B is greater than A plus some sigmas. It's not important what the exact condition is. All I want to tell you is that that's actually a weaker condition than looking at it as a whole state. That's a weaker condition looking at these 2 distances. I won't prove that, but this is A prime, let's say that's B prime. This is weaker than B prime greater than or equal to A prime. Much weaker, in fact. But ignore that. So I'm told there is a clustering in which each data point is closer to its own center than other centers. I want to find it. the conclusion is, in fact, you can find this particular clustering, exactly this, no errors, in polynomial time. This is a result of Amit Kumar and myself. So I hope the theorem is clear. Here we don't have a stochastic assumption, right? We only have this deterministic assumption. And there are two parts to the theorem. Both, the first part crucially uses SVD. Part 1, project to the k-dimensional SVD subspace. Cluster there. You can't do exact clustering perhaps, but you can do 2 approximate k clustering in the projection. And the assertion is the cluster centers are close to the true centers. Close, measured in standard deviations. Stepping back one level, I didn't put up a lot of slides on clustering, but clustering is a big topic in data science, right? And k-means is, k-means is a criterion, but it's a misnomer. It's called an algorithm, Lloyd's algorithm. I won't revisit that. Many of you know what it is widely used. The difficulty with Lloyd's algorithm is if you start badly, you can go awry. You completely get the wrong clustering or not get anywhere near the correct clustering, right? The start is crucial. A lot of attempts have been made to find a good starting set of k-centers to run your algorithm. And k-means plus plus is a famous one. There are other ones. But I know of no algorithm which finds cluster centers which lie within sigma of the true ones. K-means plus plus doesn't do that. The difficulty is, most of the time, you take data points as cluster centers. So you might take this as a cluster center. But as in this example, in general, data points can be very far from the center. So there's nowhere near the center. Right? So if you cluster with this as a center, you can get complete garbage. And in fact, you do. So the difficulty is finding centers close to quote-unquote true centers. And SVD is the only way I know of how to do that. That part of the proof is easier, actually. The convergence now, the second part says, once you have these, you run Lloyd's algorithm, you converge to the true clustering. That's hard, that proof. But there's a nice open problem to figure out some heuristic or simple algorithm, perhaps cheaper than SVD, which finds centers within few standard deviations of the correct centers, constant number.
Under what hypothesis do you want that?
Perhaps this hypothesis, for instance.
Okay.
Let's assume all of this. I think if you had mixture assumptions, then it's easy, stochastic assumptions, but I don't want stochastic. Okay, but I have to tell you what sigma is without a stochastic model, and this is a more general interest, but this sigma is just actually defined exactly the same way as if you had a stochastic model. So I take sigma squared to be maximum over all directions. I take the data point minus its cluster center, this vector, dot product with the squared distance and average them. It's a mean squared distance to your cluster center. In fact, if you had a stochastic model, you would have mean squared deviation from the mean. You could still talk about the mean squared deviation from the mean. I should say that I said this that this is a weaker condition we are assuming. It's weak enough that it basically subsumes a lot of or most of the stochastic model results, although with the catch that for stochastic models people have worked out the best constants, best separation and so on, but qualitatively it subsumes those results. Right? Now, this is not, of course, the only example. There are many examples of doing away with stochastic models. I won't describe them in detail, but just to say that it's often nice, not stochastic model people can object because it's assuming a lot. So can you do without it? Well, there are things you can do without it. Compressed sensing is an example where the assumption of incoherence. Now, that's arguable whether that's too strong also. People argue about that. But under those assumptions, they're deterministic assumptions. Or restricted isometry property. There's some work in topic models now where you don't have to assume the stochastic model. Now, for max-cut and other optimization problems, people have developed what are called stability assumptions. These assumptions say that my problem is so unique that any perturbation still leaves the result unchanged. That's what stability means. So, but the assumptions may be stronger than you may want to make in practice, but under those assumptions, people can get algorithms to do these problems. Another assumption that you often use is the spectrum of a random matrix, how the eigenvalues are plotted for a random matrix. Sometimes you can get results without assuming randomness, but assuming the spectrum has this property. This is not something I'm going to touch in depth. Now I come to numerical algorithms, or randomized algorithms actually, but we'll come to that with a slight sort of motivating intro on this slide. So in 1990, if you caught, I mean, maybe most of you couldn't have been caught and asked this question, but I was. So in 1990, if you're asked this question of a theoretical computer scientist, which of these 4 methods would scale up and get applied to large problems? Here are the 4 candidates: SVD and singular value decomposition and the numerical algorithms. And of course, this audience has all heard of it, but I must say in 1990, I may not have heard of it. I mean, this was not a standard staple thing to be offered in TCS, theoretical computer science. Network flow, shortest paths, and other graph algorithms, those I had studied. Yeah. Sophisticated data structures, display trees, and things like that. Optimization. I've just put up 4, not necessarily exhaustive list, but comprehensive topics. I mean, not comprehensive topics, but just examples. With high probability, the answer would have been 2 and 3. Not for this audience, maybe, but with high probability among TCS people, I'm going to venture out and say that. But now we know, perhaps, that the answer is more 1 and 4. So in 1990, if you told somebody that the sort of most successful web search thing is going to find the spectrum or eigenvectors of a 20 billion by 20 billion matrix, they would have laughed at you, because people didn't want to find eigenvalues and eigenvectors of even 10 by 10 matrices, perhaps, in certain segments of the research community. I mean, not all. Okay.
Ravi?
Yes. Okay. Object?
No, I have a question.
Yeah, I thought you would object. I was hoping.
Yeah. With a lot. So, what do you think of these 4 which will be used in 30 years?
I was afraid you were. No. Make it 50, I won't be around, so I can tell you. Well, so I think a combination of all. I think the point is that there was a period when TCS perhaps emphasized discrete stuff and did not as much emphasize continuous stuff. And perhaps the point about machine learning giving us this little push from the side is to say, look, continuous stuff is incredibly useful, optimization and so on. So you've got to pay attention to both. So maybe all of the above. This is a diplomatic answer to an undiplomatic question, but yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay, so why is that? Of course, you know why eigenvectors were used in PageRank, so that's one thing. But by the way, one nice thing to tell students is that the people who developed PageRank and so on, based on eigenvalues, didn't say, I need to do some search very fast, let me go look at various books and see what's the method used. No, they knew eigenvalues and eigenvectors right from the start. So you have to know them to get these answers right. This is something I tell students. But, okay, so the crucial help, of course, is decades and century of development in continuous mathematics and probability, especially numerical algorithms. But I would like to add to this toolkit randomized algorithms, which I will now talk about. Not only this talk, but there'll be several talks. Ken Clarkson, David Woodruff, Mike Mahoney, among others, will talk about randomized algorithms. So I'm going to introduce that. But also, we have the first workshop in September on randomized algorithms for matrices, all of this for matrices. So this is an early intro, and the other talks will certainly cover much more current state-of-the-art research. Right? So why randomized algorithms? Modern matrices can be massive. N cubed is too expensive, but not only time, space is a big hassle, right? Random access memory cannot store matrix, cannot store the matrix, so it cannot be accessed quickly. We have streaming models, but here I propose something a little more intermediate between streaming and RAM. A simple form of randomized algorithm we are going to compute on a sample of rows and columns. We need, however, so I'm going to sample some rows and compute only with them. But I can't just say that. I want to prove theorems that say converge, or error is such and such. Also, the sampling should be doable without a lot of work. Okay, we can do all kinds of important sampling where we compute a lot before sampling, but we want to avoid that if possible. Input data matrix may be distributed among servers. This I won't say much about. Other talks might, potentially. 2 scenarios and 1 method. This is something I want to stress. So the scenario that theoretical computer science is familiar with is there is an input to the algorithm, and the input is fixed, and then you can do things with it. That's a view that says the entire matrix exists somewhere, like, for instance, the web's interconnection. The algorithm draws a sample. Perhaps an interesting alternative input would be where only a sample of entries are known, or I can press a button and somebody will give you a sample, but it'll cost you. So recommendation systems are a very good example where getting people's choices of what they buy costs money, the surveys, right? So the nice thing about randomized algorithms where you pick only a random subset and work, either scenario can adopt the same method, except in scenario 2, you better have an idea of the sampling probabilities that were used to pick the entries, right? Otherwise, you're not going to prove anything. But here we think of 1 generally. That's here we forget 2. We think of the matrix as being present somewhere, and we are going to sample. We're going to choose the sampling probabilities and sample. So this is a setting, m by n matrix, m n large. I'm going to do certain number of IID trials, SIID trials, S for sample. Each IID trial picks a random column of A and is allowed to scale it, scale a multiple, right? And thereafter, you have to compute only with the sampled and scaled columns. There are S of them, so it's an S by n matrix, n by S matrix. So we had that, we sampled and got that, we throw that away, and we only work with this in this setting. It's clear that for most problems, uniform sampling won't do. You could have a matrix with 1 non-zero column. Uniform sampling will never see it, will only see zeros. You want to see that. So the problems some of the problems we now know that we can tackle with this is, of course, first matrix multiplication. Simple as it is, the simplest of those problems is just computing matrix times its transpose. This was actually the original motivation for all of these problems. This seems trivial, but imagine this, for instance, you can couch finding the variance covariance matrix of a probability density given the samples in these terms, but there the matrix is actually infinite, right? So the entire distribution. But more generally, you can multiply 2 arbitrary matrices. We saw what singular value decomposition is in low rank approximation. We can do those with these sampling things. Matrix sketches, which we'll see today, but we'll see in other talks as well, which are just compact representations of matrices. We'll see we can do that with sampling. I won't tell you today, but this graph falsification is based on sampling, which is based on some of these things, but of course other nice ideas. Linear regression, which we'll see not in this talk, but in other talks. Tensors we won't see, but spectral norm of a tensor is something similar to spectral norm of a matrix. What are the unit vectors you hit it with so that you get the maximum? Sampling can be applied to solve this problem approximately. I won't tell you that today. 2 things. No free lunch. Samples cannot get the correct exact answer. Of course, we know that. There are errors to be made. But we want to prove error bounds for all input matrices. So what I'm going to say from now on is not just for most matrices. That's not interesting. It's for all matrices. Right? Worst case. Little notation, not much notation. Frobenius norm is the sum of squares. Spectral norm is what you know it is. That's the maximum over all unit length vectors of the expansion. Well, since I took unit length vectors, the length of that. A is m by n. So these are all the pieces of notation I'll use. On S is the number of sample columns. Okay, so the first result, again, these are early ones, and you will see state of the art in the coming lectures the next few days, as well as in the workshop. Low rank approximation with additive error. We seek here a rank k approximation A star to A, so that either an expectation or with high probability, the following is true. A star wants to be an approximation to A, right? And the error now first is measured in Frobenius norm. We want that to be best possible error we can make, the lowest error we can make with any rank K matrix, plus a sampling error. Right? And the sampling error depends on the Frobenius norm. Okay. So this is one thing we seek, and we can seek the same thing for spectral norm as well. And the main theorem, this early theorem, is that the number of samples you need to prove this is independent of M and N. And indeed, you can use this on infinite matrices as well, okay, provided certain things are convergent. So certain things don't blow up. Okay. So if you take a polynomial in K, the rank needed, and epsilon, the error needed, that suffices, provided. It doesn't suffice if you sample uniformly. Of course, we don't know that it suffices for other distributions. It suffices when you sample with probabilities proportional to the squared length of the columns. It is known for some other distributions, and you'll see them later, so I'll leave that for the later talk. So what is this? This is saying pick a column with probability proportional to the sum of squares of its entries. This is a distribution for which we know that this theorem works. Yes?
So coming back to one of the motivations where it was the data is actually distributed across different servers and randomization helps you to reduce the communication. Can you do that kind of sampling if you can't look at all the columns?
When the data is spread out over processing? Yeah. Yes, there is some recent work. I won't be talking about it. You can communicate little o of the entire thing, right? It's not interesting to communicate the whole thing, but you can. I don't know whether David might mention it, probably not, right? Yeah, it's some work of David's and mine and Santosh. I won't talk about it. I can give you reference. Any other questions? Yeah?
Do you know if the additive error is necessary?
Yes?
Necessary? The additive error, is it necessary?
Well, okay. There'll be other talks which give you multiplicative errors. Sorry?
In this setting, where you sample?
In this setting, it is necessary, I believe, yeah. That is, at least S has to depend polynomially on 1 over epsilon. Now, I'm hedging a little bit because I haven't paid much attention to lower bounds of late, but I believe it's necessary. Any other? Somebody else might answer that. But we'll see. I don't want to pick somebody. Okay, so if you do squared length sampling, this is true. This proof requires a bit of sweat, right? So I won't go over the proof. Now, this would not be, maybe that's sort of the question. This wouldn't be interesting if this is large, right? If the error is too large. So for instance, if the error is larger than the best possible SVD error, it won't be interesting. It can be. This can be larger than that for arbitrary matrices. But the fact that it's smaller holds for matrices arising in principal component analysis. These are matrices where the top few singular vectors occupy a fair bit of the spectrum. So, which is true for things that you do PCA with. When you do PCA, you do it with matrices where the top few ranks tell you a good bit of information. And when that is true, then in fact this is plausible. This was in a paper in 1998. Again, a lot of things have been done on the subject since, so we'll see them. Okay, so I said that. So data handling, you could have the streaming model because the matrices are too large. Instead, most of these results are done in the following model. The data is too massive to be stored in RAM. That still we assume. The simplified model, we measure 3 resources: RAM, time, and space, a number of passes. So a pass, we assume, is the only way to access matrix from external memory, and you have to sequentially read the whole thing. This, of course, is simplification, but under these assumptions. So most of these algorithms do only 2 passes. I said constant, but 2 passes. And the RAM space they use is only to store order star, I should have said, yeah, columns or rows, small number of columns or rows. The 1 pass is can be used to find the squared length of probabilities, right? We have to take the square length of each column to be able to sample, important sampling. So we find those and pass through draws the computation. Okay. Oh, it's outside. People from outside are not allowed to ask questions. So, sketch of a matrix. So here I'm going to tell you how a sample of rows and columns give you information about the whole matrix, right? That's what a sketch means. So, can a sample of rows form a sketch of the matrix? No, because the sample of rows tells you nothing about the unsampled rows. That's not good enough. How about a sample of rows and columns? We'll see the answer is yes. So I give you a small sample of rows, columns. That's enough. That contains information about all the entries of the matrix with errors, right? So first suppose first some intuition. First suppose A is rank K, and I pick 100K rows. If things are in decent general position, that should pin down the row space of A, right? I picked enough rows that I should be getting more or less the entire row space of A. But I still don't know for each unsampled row what linear combination it is of the sampled rows, right? It's probably a linear combination. 100K is enough to span the whole space, but we don't know what combination. Now suppose I pick 100K columns, and now intuitively, if the rows are in general position, there should be a unique linear way of expressing each row in the sample in terms of the other row spaces, right? So this is intuitive. So once I give you rows and columns, you should be able to pin down what happened to the entire matrix. I'll say the theorem properly next slide. So length squared sampling of rows and columns. We need to do sampling by length squared probabilities, otherwise we don't know what theorem here. C is a matrix formed by sampling and scaling S columns of A according to length squared. R is a sample of rows now, but a different number, root S. That's for a technical reason, but the sampling is done also according to length squared sampling. And now the theorem is this. If you give me C and R, I'll put a picture. Okay, this is due to Petros Adranayasmi and Mike Mahoney. But there have been a lot of improvements, and there's a very nice results of both Thedis and Woodruff, which gives the optimal algorithm for finding this. For finding that U from C and R. Now here's the picture. So I have the matrix. The assertion of the theorem is, I give you a sample of columns, that is my C. I give you a sample of rows, that's my R. And I put the right size matrix to put in between, which is found just from C and R. And the assertion is A is approximately C times U times R. The dimensions are correct and I can multiply.
So there's no rank assumption anymore?
No rank assumption, no.
Sorry, what do you mean by rank assumption? Like we want U to have rank K? Or
sorry?
What was the question? Like we want U to have rank K?
Yeah, if you want to have...
Okay. You're not assuming that A has small rank to start with.
No, yeah.
No, A doesn't necessarily have small. But if you want the rank, the error compared to the best rank A, you can even do more stuff. But this, yeah. For spectral norm, I don't need a K term. So, okay, so let me, I guess it's clear what it is, right? The expected spectral norm error is this. The expectation is over random choices of C and R.
What's the intuition for S versus S? Square root S?
No. So you should ask, do you have an intuition for S versus square root S? The answer is, I don't. I think now we know better, right? Do we know without S and root S both being the same? No, maybe not. Okay, let me try to answer your question, right? No, maybe let me punt it. I think it's too involved for me to formulate a good answer. Yeah. So, so now, if you do this, then let's say that in many applications, one way a matrix is used is to multiply it by vectors, matrix vector products. So if you want to multiply A by a vector X, it's much easier to multiply this because you can see that the multiplication time is smaller. I can multiply r times x and u times that vector and c times that vector. For instance, that's one use of it. There are other uses that are made of this in databases. I won't go through the applications. But maybe, are there any other questions? There are a number of other results. Again, you will see more in other talks.
I have
Yeah. Sorry.
So the theorem should be about the Frobenius norm?
There is a statement in the Frobenius norm too, which I didn't make. See, the reason I made the spectral norm is that I can put an absolute bound here, because by the time I go to S, the spectral norm would have fallen. I mean, the singular value has to have fallen. The Frobenius norm would not. But there is a result for Frobenius norm as well. So, yeah.
So with sampling columns only, the good thing that you can do it distributed with some minimum amount of communication.
You mean if they are in different servers or something?
Yeah, so your A is so big that it's not even fitting the disk of one machine.
Right.
Now in this case, then that messes up the whole.
That messes up the rows, right. So the distributed computing has to be done without assuming entire columns are on one server. So the entries are split pell-mell, and you have our algorithm, which I won't talk about, do develop a way of communicating so that you can get a sample of these things. But yes, if it's column-wise split, rows sampling is difficult, and vice versa. Yeah?
What would happen if you had some other distribution you were able to sample from, but not this one?
Okay, good point. I should mention that you don't have to sample exactly from length squared. It's enough to be, the probability of a column needs to be at least, let's say, a constant times the squared length. That is sufficient. Now, if I can only sample from some uniform distribution, you can get a result, but the variance is high. So for any distribution, you can get an expected bound, but it won't be very good necessarily. There will be other distributions based on leverage scores and so on, which will be talked about in the other talks, which are more complicated sampling, but give you better results. Yeah?
If you just take the rows with the largest norm and the columns with the largest norm, is there a counterexample that you can't?
Yeah, so if you had one column with epsilon greater norm than zillion other columns, you get the wrong answer, right? You've missed the zillion other columns. Yeah, something like that. So actually, yeah.
What if you would use that expression to do the regularized inverse?
Okay, so inverse is a bit of a problem because the errors here are proportional to, not here but in the other one, proportional to the Frobenius norm. The lowest singular values which determine inverse more are likely to have too much error for you to do anything. So inverse is a problem. The lower singular values are a problem. They're always a problem, but also here.
But you said regularized. The regularized inverse.
Regularized inverse.
Maybe he's
So you get rid of some of the worst ones, but
Regularized in, okay. David, you want to?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, actually we don't. What, you mean like preconditional?
more Penrose inverse.
Oh, that is, it may not be full rank, you're saying. Inverse in the space on which it operates, the column space. Is that what you're saying? You know what they denote by A dagger? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so A dagger, I mean, that's the same problem. You have to know the lowest non-zero singular value reasonably well. And you won't know that unless you have a lot of samples. Okay, I should qualify. Okay, I should qualify all of that a little bit. In the graph falsification application, they use some results, later results than these, for length squared sampling by Rudelson. So I will not talk about that, but length squared sampling, the bounds I gave you here have been improved by function analysts. And using those, so if you had a long skinny matrix, you can make do with number of samples that depend on the smaller dimension and still get the Penrose inverse correct.
Okay.
But you need number of samples that depends on one of the dimensions at least. Yeah? Okay, we can... so I want to visit very briefly another topic, Markov chains. I mean, partly because it's the next chapter in the book, but partly it's not an unnatural thing. It's linear algebra based, right? You say all know what a Markov chain is based on a directed graph with positive edge weights. The sum of edge weights going out of each vertex is 1. At each step, the walk is at a vertex, picks an out edge, according to the probabilities, walks to the other end. And we'll say the Markov chain is connected if the graph is strongly connected because these are directed edges. The fundamental theorem of Markov chains, if you've seen the fundamental theorem, you would not necessarily recognize this, but this is my fundamental theorem of Markov chains. For a connected Markov chain, the expected fraction of the time walk spends at each vertex converges to a limit. And we call that the stationary probability vertex. It's a function, the limiting probability is a function only of the vertex, not of the starting distribution, right? Now, the usual statement you might have seen says that the t-step probability, the distribution at time t converges, is a much harder theorem, but it needs also a technical condition called periodicity of a Markov chain, which is, I think, a red herring. Please don't ever pay attention to periodicity, it's not important. And I'll tell you why. But it is important to prove that limit exists, right? If you want that mathematical theorem, it's important. So in many applications, so you run a Markov chain. If I know that the distribution, instantaneous distribution at time t is good, I stop the Markov chain at a large enough time and take the sample. Okay. Now in practice, that's not what you would do. Using info about only where it is instantaneously is wasteful. You would rather take the running average of all the states you've been in for the entire run and use that. And for that, this fundamental theorem is what is needed, not the other one. So periodicity goes away if you average over the entire run. Also, the proof is easier. Maybe I'll try to indicate a proof. But before that, now, Markov chains are run usually, well, in quite a few instances, the Markov chain is too large, it's exponentially large. But you run it for a polynomial number of steps and prove that it is almost equally likely to have been every state. So even though the space is exponential, you can probe it in polynomial time, and you're likely to see each part about the same fraction of time you hold. You obviously will visit very few states compared to the total number of states, but if you take any large chunks, you're likely to visit it about the right number of times already in polynomial number of steps. So such Markov chains are the ones that are used in practice. In statistical mechanics is one place where originally they were used a lot in, but they are also used in computer science now. For instance, to find the number of matchings, to solve counting problems. But underlying that is this slide showing rapid mixing. Rapid mixing says that the Markov chain converges in number of steps much less than the number of states. Right? Number of states exponentially, it converges in polynumber of steps. So how does one prove that? So I'm going to do it only for symmetric chain. Symmetric chain means the probability of going from x to y is the same as y to x. But the theorem works more generally. We define something called the conductance, and here a picture would be useful. You have a subset of states S, and this is a complementary set of states S bar. I want to look at all edges going from S to S bar. The numerator measures the probabilities added up over all these, and the denominator measures the smaller of the two sets. Now, the intuition is, I better have a large probability of stepping out from any set if I want to be uniformly everywhere, right? So I need these things to be large. If these things were small, in particular if the Markov chain looked like this, S and no way to go to the state, then it'll take me infinitely long before I'm equally likely to be anywhere. I'll never reach here, right? So this is a condition. This being high is a necessary condition for me to be equally likely to be anywhere soon. And the conductance phi of the chain is the minimum over all subsets. So if you had a Markov chain, I should have drawn these pictures. If you had a Markov chain that looked like a dumbbell schematically, so one set of states, another set of states, weak connections, it'll take very long. So the conductance measures the weakest connection between any set of states and its complement. And the famous theorem of Jerome and Sinclair says that the Markov chain converges in time which is only dependent on phi, 1 over phi squared. So it's clear that the weakest connection can restrict you, so it's a necessary condition that there be no weak connection. They prove that it's sufficient. If there's no weak connection, weak subset to complement connection, then you converge very quickly. That's an informal theorem. I'll state the formal theorem. So formally, we have switched to taking running averages. So these P naught is the probability distribution at time 0, time 1, time t minus 1. I take the average of those. That's a running average. That gives you the probability of being in state t, the expected number of times being in state t over all these things. Sorry, over each state in time t. And mixing time, at mixing time you visited everybody equally. Everybody is 1 over n. In the limit, that's true, but you want to be close to the limit. You want all the probabilities or fraction of time spent to be with an epsilon of 1 over n, and the theorem is that, right? This is a formal statement of the theorem. Ignore the exact factor.
Should be for regular symmetric.
For symmetric chain.
Does symmetric imply regularity as an undirected graph?
No.
Okay.
Oh no, it need not be regular.
So it should be, this is for regular graphs, right? Otherwise it will be proportional to the degree of a vertex.
No, because as long as it's symmetric, the stationary probabilities are the same for all vertices. So maybe you're thinking the degree condition was needed to make this limiting probabilities the same.
Right.
But they are same as long as it's symmetric and connected already.
Symmetric, deregular. I mean, if the graph is regular, then you're equally likely to be at every vertex.
But so are you if it's symmetric. So for instance, even if you had a path, right, with probabilities all halves, you're equally likely to be anywhere.
Yeah, that's.
So for instance, I guess the degree,
graph.
that's regular. I have to give you a better example than that. But it doesn't have to be regular. As long as it's symmetric, it's true.
Question is why the stationary distribution is not 1 over the degree?
The stationary distribution should be the degree over the number of edges. For every vertex, it should be the degree over the number of edges.
No, see,
What happens to the star?
huh?
Star, you would be in the middle vertex with probability 1/2.
No, star and back, right? So star, if it's only 1 over n probability, okay, so here is, okay, maybe, so star, 1 over n probability each way, but I'm only going to put 1 over n this way also, and the rest I'm going to do self-loop.
Oh, okay. All right.
So,
Okay, good, okay. You're putting
it's not necessary to the degree, yeah, so,
the self-loops are making it regular, right?
well, okay. So I still haven't come up with a non-regular symmetry example, but there are lots of them.
Okay.
Okay, good, yeah. So, yeah, there was a danger of ending too early, so it's good. Yes.
I think not necessarily we need to have a symmetric matrix. As far as it's doubly stochastic matrix, we have uniform spatial
So this works more generally for what are called time reversible Markov chains, not just for symmetric chains, but I didn't want to define that. It's more general than symmetric. So I want to actually, so some of you are familiar with the proof, some are not, but I want to give you sort of a one-slide intuition about a sort of unusual proof. It's not the usual proof that you see. So the idea of the proof is this, of both the fundamental theorem and the convergence. You run one step starting from AT. So AT were the fraction of time you have so far spent, right? But you observe that that's also a probability distribution because it adds to 1 over all vertices. So I'm going to do a conceptual step, one step, starting from that distribution. That's not how the Markov chain runs, but I'm going to do it in my mind. Then the change happens, that is, you take that distribution, starting, hit it with probability matrix P, that's one step, and take the difference from what you had. And you see that all terms cancel out because P0 times P is P1, P1 times P is P2, and so on. They all cancel out except for the last two, first and last, and that converges to 0. So the crucial argument is just based on this, that this converges to 0. That's going to be the key argument. Okay, so some details in the rest of this slide, that when you see that the numerator and denominator are equal, you should be happy. So if the relative weight of a state is pi is the steady state, ATI is the fraction you've spent so far. So VI is high means you've spent too much time. Okay? And VI is low means you've spent too little time. The net probability flow from I to j in that one step. In that one step, there's a calculation. Don't worry about that. But the moral is that probability flows from heavy to light states in the step. Okay? Sounds intuitively obvious, but just a little calculation. So heavy to light vertices. And the probability flow lemma, which is central to the proof, is if you have two disjoint sets of vertices, with the first set each being heavier than the second set, then there's a minimum certain amount of flow from the first to the second. So if I'm A heavier than this, then the flow is A much, right? That's the probability lemma. That's just a simple calculation. Now, why is that good? We can also show that the net flow from all heavy states to light states, well, that's just the change, and that's A minus AP in L1 norm. But we saw that that change goes to 0. So net flow from heavy to light states goes to 0, and this says if some states are much heavier than others, there's a lot of flow. Okay. You cannot have that, right? So heavy vertices cannot be much heavier than light ones. If they were, the flow would be too heavy. Okay. So this can be completed to a proof. It's the reference in the book, right? So it's sort of a more probabilistic proof than perhaps what one sees from it. Okay, I'm done. That's really good.
Can you sort of tell us what kinds of settings are MCMC algorithms being used nowadays?
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, so a lot of statistical mechanics things that are useful. I mean, Mike Mahoney did his PhD in physics and chemistry on the water molecule and used MCMC algorithms. Right? You can now, they are also used in the geometric setting to find volumes of convex sets. Not only volumes of convex sets, but probability measures. So suppose I have a Gaussian, and I want to know what the mass of this particular set is, right? Or the Gaussian is a failure probability, let's say. You would like to compute for regions which have very small failure totally. Hopefully it's a reliable system, right? You would like to compute the probability mass there, and you do MCMC there. So you can't integrate if this is a complicated region, so you do it. MCMC is Markov chain Monte Carlo. I guess I didn't explain it.
Any other questions for Ravi? Okay, let's take